I don't feel I have a place in manga. These are the opening words in a monologue from a jaded manga legend, Hiroyuki Take. There's more to this quote, but what's important is this is the creator of Shaman King, a staple shonen and gem of the early 2000s. But unlike some of his peers, one in particular he worked alongside as assistants for someone else, his work by comparison would be mishandled, having no ending for years, even having an anime remake in recent years that no one seemed to care for. With around 40 million sales, it's not been as unfortunate as other pieces left in obscurity, far from it. Instead, let's take a peek at a series many feel deserves much better. 1998, Stone Cold beat Shawn Michaels for the WWF title, France won the World Cup, Norm Macdonald was having a field day with Bill Clinton.
Here we see the president and the first bitch.
And a young Japanese artist would move on from working as an assistant to take a shot of his own. Just a year prior, his co-worker did the same thing, and so Take, with his desire to make something cool, made Shaman King, a series following Yo Asakura, a laid-back individual with the ability to communicate with spirits, a shaman, and uses his samurai spirit to deal with any issues. This is discovered by Manta, a very expressive individual, to put it nicely, that Yo befriends. Turns out Yo's been training to compete in a grand tournament that takes place every 500 years to determine the next Shaman King. I swear I just did a video on this. It is worth keeping in mind that Shaman King did come out before a lot of the series that would go on to make a lot of story concepts here far more popular. Also, quick mention of the character designs, which are awesome. I showed some of this stuff to my artist who did the thumbnail and the animation in the Zatch Bell video, and his immediate reaction was to the character designs. Take's quote where he says he likes to make quote-unquote cool things is proven true just from the first few pages of this series. But going back to the story, the plot itself isn't complicated, so that leaves room for the characters to shine. Yo is an extremely easy character to like, very cool and wise beyond his years. Why does he want to become the Shaman King? So that he can have an easy life and do what he wants. That motivation does go through change, of course, but my biggest concern while reading this was that he comes off as a very complete character, someone you see more so in the mentor role and not the main character one. There are things in the present that push Yo to grow a lot, especially once the main antagonist is introduced, but a lot of his essence is given context in the second half of the story through long flashbacks, similar to how Alan Walker's character is handled in The Gray Man. Other characters such as Anna, who is Yo's wife or professed wife once he becomes the Shaman King, is the same way. At first it felt her character only consisted of stating she was Yo's wife over and over and over again, but then once the flashback happens, her character is given a whole new light. So a bit of patience is required with this manga, since the action is good, but nowadays it most likely isn't something you haven't already seen. Ren is the Sasuke, Dark Pit, Shadow the Hedgehog, you get a archetype character. At first came off very generic, and he doesn't deviate from the growth we see from the evil rivals turned good guys, but by the end of the series he serves as a beautiful example of growth and change, adding to the core theme of Shaman King as a whole and filling the gaps that one might feel Yo's character has, which is the point of a good cast. Take stated that Ren and Horo, another character that we find out more about near the end of the story, were necessary for the jump formula, but he made the most of them. Faust is also one of my favorite characters, a necromancy-using shaman that served as the first real memorable antagonist in the series. I'll be honest, it's mainly aesthetics with him, why I really like his character, but it's when the actual big bad enters the fray once the tournament starts that the story hits a second gear. How? That's not a question, that's his name. How? And if he looks familiar, well, use your brain for a quick second and take a wild guess. This man is a powerhouse with a strong detest for humanity. Think Magneto, somewhat. And if he becomes Shaman King, he will make a world with only shamans. We do get a look into his past. It's effective, but brief. How nonetheless remains a respectable main antagonist, serving as the opposition to Yo's ideals and beliefs, along with the personal responsibility Yo feels that he needs to handle him. How, despite his immense power, doesn't really wish to rule with an iron fist or to be some sort of dictator. In fact, there are a lot of scenes where he's extremely laid back, similar to Yo himself. But if not, he sees humanity as a disease to get rid of, a being that is supremely detached from humanity because of the pain he's endured. It isn't the most unique concept for a villain, but I think his dynamic with Yo makes it a well-executed one, a character that I for sure will have to make a dedicated video on sometime. Shaman King's cast is something I want to delve more into, but it's easy to see why at the time this would be a massive success, especially with the release of the anime in 2001, doing very well in Japan and overseas, becoming a stamp of a time period in anime and manga, having games such as Master of Spirits. My first exposure to Shaman King, other than just hearing about it, was a crossover event it had with Grand Summoners. Take had a hit, and considering he started his manga career as a way to provide for his newborn child, what else could someone ask for? The story was also finding its stride. Thematically, it was coming together and providing something far more than just being cool. A very important thing to Take as well. Quote, "Manga is often considered a snack, a simple form of entertainment, something that should be fun. However, I think that it is better if it brings you something." End quote. Style and substance is an important blend. Makes sense as he was inspired by JoJo's and Blade of the Immortal. This would take Shaman King to the top of the charts, selling over 38 million copies by the year 2021. Numbers comparable to Haikyuu, Seven Deadly Sins, and Spy X Family. But how did we go from this to the quote at the start? Despite the boom it had as the story reached the end, he became worn out, pushing himself to show more of his artistic capability. Quote, "Rather than drawing for the readers, part of me was making things to have fun myself. That wasn't a good thing." End quote. The early mid-2000s had been one of the, if not the most competitive Jump has ever been. JoJo's Part 6 and the beginning of Steel Ball Run, Eyeshield 21, Death Note, Gintama, Hitman Reborn, Gray Man, Hunter x Hunter, Full Metal Alchemist. That's not even going into the plethora of ones that were axed for not being able to keep up. The series started to drop in the rankings, especially with the releases and massive success of the things listed, and also the things such as Naruto, Bleach, and oh yeah, that series started a year prior by his coworker. This is where I want to delve more into the quote that I started at the beginning. Quote, "I don't feel I have a place in the manga world. I don't think on how to position myself in this field. I always take a step back from manga when I look at it. I was confronted with Eiichiro Oda from the beginning. So from that point, I knew the mainstream road was not fit for me. If I had sold more manga and were more popular, I would probably have thought more of my position as a mangaka. However, I thought I wasn't made for mainstream. I gave up from that point and didn't think of it. I just want to make cool things." End of quote. Talk about comparison being the thief of joy. For most, the success of Shaman King would be enough, but he worked under the creator of Kenshin, a manga that would sell over 72 million and inspire countless, just don't check his office, and the guy he worked with for Kenshin would go on to be the creator of One Piece, the highest selling manga of all time. Having that be your personal measuring stick as you struggle to finish your story and watch your series decline has to be tough. The weight of feeling like you're getting better at your craft, but the results are showing the opposite, it's an infuriating experience that eats away at your passion and fuels self-doubt. Creatively, you begin to feel claustrophobic, and what you were once certain you were great at, now you feel like you don't belong. My buddy Manly Reviews, in his video about Dark Souls, mentioned how Miyazaki, working on Dark Souls when Demon Souls was still considered a financial failure. In a weird way, not having any expectations can afford you a freedom. But in Take's case, he has the expectations he has set with his own success, the expectations of a hyper-competitive magazine, and the guy at the top of said magazine being someone he personally worked alongside with. The pressure was becoming too much. Right when the story was reaching its climax, readers were denied as Shaman King went on to be cancelled. What was once a shining jewel was thrown back into the mines to collect dirt. Take was of course frustrated, but he also felt freedom, no longer stuck in the grind of what was being a mangaka under Jump at the time. Quote, "Part of me felt rescued when I was cut off." End quote. Shaman King would get another chance with an anime remake in 2021, but it was largely disappointing, failing to capture the essence fans wanted and failing to move the needle in terms of popularity, only going from 38 million to 41 million sales present day. Although you could argue that a lot of those sales might have just been fans that grew up and now had money to buy the entire series. I remember there being some talk about it, but after checking it out for myself, it felt like something that was made to benefit off of an IP. While they were busy giving all the love to the new moneymakers, it feels lacking in the passion to really bring the series to life in the modern day. Ultimately a letdown, much like the Hell's Paradise anime was for me. While doing research for this part of the video, I reached the midway point of the story where I had doubts that were mentioned earlier about the characters and plot, but I decided to continue since Take years later went back to give Shaman King an ending, I believe around the year 2008. And around that point in the story I was in, there were gleams of hope as the characters became more fleshed out. Another one of the favorites, Joko, being introduced, a great character playing into the themes of death and atonement, serving as a comedy relief by telling awful jokes, his way of living as he was taught by the man who changed his life, teaching him to live more lighthearted and not full of hate. As the tournament reached its latter stages, the massive gap between Hao and the others was made very clear, most of them having a mana count, think power levels of a few thousand, while Hao sits at 1.2 million. How will they beat him? I'm sorry, you can leave, I understand. And Yo is forced to drop out of the tournament and stop him through other means. I consider myself very fortunate that I was able to read it all the way through with the ending that Take would include, since it's non-stop from chapter 140-ish and on. I'm glad I had the patience, since every single worry I noted down was resolved, except one. Manta, the character at the start, is pretty much phased out for the majority of the series. He is included in the end again, but it felt more like a, oh shit, let me fit this guy in again, instead of something that was properly fleshed out. But outside of that one gripe, I think it does justice to all the other characters. As said with Zatch Bell, it is for sure a product of its time, but I found Yo to be one of my favorite main characters from that era. Learning that being Shaman King won't allow him to live the easy, carefree life he wants, but that it will create responsibility. The task to take care of those he cares about, and ensure none of them give in to the hatred that consumed Hao. Being a stone for those in need, and a glittering light that uplifts those around him. One of my favorite interactions is when Ren is struggling, wondering if he will ever be free from the hatred he grew up in and lives by. It's all he knows, and will his existence be a constant cycle of atonement? Yo tells him, love. You'll find someone someday, settle down, start a family, and then I'm sure there will be no room for hate left inside of you. Love being the same power that would go on to defeat Hao, and give him peace. Not gonna lie, it's uncanny, some of the similarities between this and Zatch Bell, reading them back to back. It's interesting how Shaman King has a similar story as the premise itself, a wandering spirit unable to rest since it has something tying it to the world. I'm sure even though Take was relieved he could take a break, he was even happier once he was able to complete the series and give it the send-off it deserved, feeling satisfied that he was able to have some closure. It's a real shame the anime remake didn't do what most of the fans of the series were hoping for, but I would still recommend giving this series a read. You know what you're getting into, but I think what you get out of it are timeless reminders that never go unappreciated. It's no piece of fool's gold, but a valuable piece of manga from that era. Quote, I feel that Shaman King is a series that is somewhat being looked down on. I want to prove that it's a proper series and deserves its place. End quote. Despite its setbacks, I do believe Shaman King is a jewel of its time. The 41 million sales speaks to itself, even if the author might feel like that's not enough. But the fun action and pearls of wisdom fans of this series were able to take from the characters is proof that it has engraved its place in the manga world.